Now, we know that our bodies are mostly going to be composed of fluid. Now, the fluid in our bodies is going to be found in one of two places. It's either going to be found inside our cells, what we might call intracellular fluid, or it could be found outside of our cells in what we would call extracellular fluid. So intra meaning inside, extra meaning outside. Now, something like 2/3 of all of our fluid is going to be found inside the plasma membranes of our cells. Only 1/3 is going to be considered extracellular. Now, extracellular fluid, we can break down into a couple of major components. The first one of these is going to be, of course, our blood plasma. That's what we tend to think about whenever we think about fluids in our body. We think about this massive well of fluid that is our blood. However, that's only going to make up 1/3 of the extracellular fluid, which is only 1/3 of our total fluids in and of themselves. So that means it's only 1/9 of all of the fluid that we have. The other 2/3 of extracellular fluid is going to be composed of interstitial fluid. So interstitial means between the tissues. So interstitial fluid is going to be fluid that is found between our cells and between some cells and outlying tissues. So interstitial fluid is going to make up 2/3 of our extracellular fluid. Now, if 2/3 of our total fluid is going to be inside of our cells, you might be asking yourself, well, isn't there bound to be some variance there? We have lots of different cells. Wouldn't there be some differences? And you'd be completely right. Skeletal muscle cells, for instance, have really, really high fluid content. So they're filled with lots and lots of water. Something like 75% of the mass of a skeletal muscle cell is going to be composed of water. That is a lot. So someone that has more skeletal muscle is going to have more water. So they're going to have a larger fluid well that they could potentially draw on to make sure that ion concentrations and all of those kinds of things are maintained healthily. The opposite of this is true for something like fat cells. Fat cells have really, really low amounts of water. I mean, once again, we know that waters don't mix well with fats. So it would make sense that those cells that are really, really rich in lipids that are filled with those fat droplets, that there's not going to be a lot of water in there. And that only makes up around 20% of our adipose cells. So this means that someone that is high in fat is also going to potentially have a lower amount of fluid on which they can draw, which means people that have these higher percentages of fat are going to be more likely to have ion imbalances. So they're more likely to have issues with making sure that we keep water and sodium, potassium, calcium, all of these things at the correct levels in the correct places, simply because we don't have as much water that we can move around. So this tends to be seen in folks that have higher body weights, but also or higher BMIs, as well as folks that are elderly, where we may have had some muscle senescence and some added body fat coming into play. Now, in all of these fluids, we're also going to find differences between the components that are inside these fluids. So if we look here at this figure for intracellular fluid, we can see that we're going to find a lot of potassium on the inside of our intracellular fluid. A little bit of magnesium, several other things, but our highest percentage is going to be potassium. But if we look at interstitial fluid, this is the opposite. Well, we know that this is probably not a surprise, since we know that we maintain this difference in ion concentration on either side of our plasma membrane, so that we have some activated cells that we can utilize, and we can actually utilize this difference between them. It's just we can see this really, really starkly here between the intracellular fluid and our interstitial fluid. Now, we can also see that our interstitial fluid is different in that we actually have very little protein that's going to be found in the interstitial fluid. Most of that protein is either going to be found inside the cells, so either inside the cells or in the plasma membranes of those cells, or in places like the blood plasma, you can find a little bit of protein. What this also tells us is that we have a hard time getting protein out of the blood plasma and getting it into the interstitial fluid. We have to have some particular ways to do that if we actually need that to occur. However, usually we really need the proteins in the cells so that those cells can kind of do their particular jobs. Now, we can also see some differences here in our anions. So these are things that are negatively charged. Most of the proteins that are inside our cells are also negatively charged. So once again, we can see some big differences here between intracellular fluid, interstitial fluid, and blood plasma. But I also do want to draw your attention to how similar interstitial fluid and blood plasma are. One of the biggest differences between them really is that our blood plasma is going to contain lots of protein. This gives us some colloid osmotic pressure that we can utilize to cause fluid and things like that to move. We don't have those proteins in our interstitial fluid.